2 weeks ago, Christina, she's sitting right over there. She's really probably going to be very excited that I'm naming her. Texted me because a group of clergy were going to go to the mall to pray. In guilty ways, people have thanked me for going. I say in guilty ways because I wasn't sure that I was going to go, because I too feel deeply the discomfort of walking into another person's grief and feeling like I'm foisting myself on them, for which I am deeply grateful for community and colleagues who presume me to be a better man than I am and say, "Shall we drive together to go?" And I say, "Sure, meet here and we'll drive over together." And we prayed with some colleagues in the center of the mall as it reopened after the shooting. And then we all broke off into little groups and we walked to the mall together. Some just walking, those hallways still echoing with violence. And some engaging store clerks and security guards and others who were there, some because they had no choice and had to be there, and some because they wanted to revisit a space where they had so recently experienced tragedy and were still carrying that grief. I followed Christina into a store, and she, braver than I, spoke to one of the clerks and explained that we were just there to pray and hear and let them know we were thinking of them, in no way trying to foist ourselves on, but recognize that we were there. And the person, not surprisingly, said, "We just don't want to talk about it." And we bid them a good day and we left. But I haven't left that moment. That moment doesn't want to leave me, because I am all too sure it was right that they not speak to us. But I am all too fearful that we won't speak to anybody. That we, good citizens that we are, will treat it like water under the bridge and move on about our lives, because we didn't die, it didn't hurt us, we weren't there, it's in the past. Whatever reason we might give, we will act like we should just move on. That it's in the past and we're moving to the future. We will move on like the echoes of trauma don't follow us into all the corners of our lives, which they do, and which they will, like an unrelenting predator who never loses the scent. I am fascinated by a trajectory of moments in Scripture in which there are what I'll call double miracles. Not all of them, mind you. Most of them, not so much. But there is a thread from Old Testament on through of such double miracles. If you are reading in the prophet Ezekiel, which I'm sure you do daily, you might remember the vision of the dry bones, right? A valley of not just the dead, but the dried up dead. This resembling Israel, which has no life and no future. And Ezekiel is told to prophesy to the bones that they might live, and they are knit together, from which we get the somewhat horrendous, somewhat catchy children's song about which bone's connected to which bone. But in the text, they're not alive. They're now just bodies brought back together, but they don't have life. I had this really, really strange professor in college. His name was Cliff Maxwell. Turns out Cliff Maxwell went to Boise State, but I didn't know what Boise State was back then. And Cliff had gone to the Peace Corps and had spent time in Nepal, and then he spent time working in the railroad in Australia to earn enough money to spend 6 months in Bangkok, and we didn't ask doing what, and back and forth. And then he had come back and he had done his PhD at UVA, an okay school if you can't get into William and Mary. And UVA PhD grads would spend a year teaching at William and Mary. And he was my cultural anthropologist. He was actually my professor first for Southeast Asian philosophy and American culture, and then later for Cultural Anthropology 101. And I partly credit my becoming a minister to Cliff, though it would certainly never have been his intention. And we've reconnected a couple times over the years when he's come back to Boise to visit. But one time I went really early in the morning. I'm a late night guy. Normally I didn't go to bed till 3, 4, 5 in the morning during college. And he ran a meditation session at 7 in the morning. And I went once, and we did these series of Southeast Asian meditation things, including, I remember one that was called the Lion, where you got on your knees and you held the things that are just yuck in your life right here, and then you roared them out. We have a lot that's yuck in our life, and we could go on for a while. I did this for an hour with a small group of people, and then walking back through campus, what I was struck by was that they were dry bones. Everyone I walked by was a body animated, but without much life. And almost all of them looked a lot like what I would normally look like on a given day, going to an 8 o'clock class, having fallen asleep at 5. We know what it is to live in half-life. And so God says to Ezekiel, back in this text, prophesy again, prophesy to the 4 winds that they would blow through and give life. Because we are God-breathed. And the 4 winds come, and these dry bones are brought back to life, as Israel would be brought back to life. Not 1 miracle, but 2 miracles. One to pull them out of death, but another to release them from death's hold, that they might have life. My favorite moment in the Gospel of Mark is the Jesus on his way to Jairus to heal Jairus' daughter, Jairus being a very important person, and we know the story well. Most of you do, but not all of you. So I'll tell you what happens, right? A woman who for 12 years has had a flow of blood, who has been unclean and ostracized from the society, who has bankrupted herself trying to get doctors to heal her to no avail, and this woman, so desperate, clings to the tassels on Jesus' cloak, knowing that if she does so, she might be made well. Jesus is moving along. The whole crowd's there. He feels healing power go out, is what the text says. And she's healed, right? Like the healing power's gone out. She's healed, but Jesus stops. Double miracles. You saw this one coming, right? Jesus stops and says, "Who touched me?" And his disciples, being his disciples, know that things are decently and in order, and they have to be over there right now, not right here right now. And they say, "How in the world do we know who touched you? There's a lot of people around." And she says, "I did." He says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Because it wasn't enough that she be healed, the community needed to be restored to her. She needed to be proclaimed well publicly and in the eye of all those who had learned to ignore her when they stopped at the stoplight and didn't want to see her with her sign saying, "I need a home, I need a companion, I need food." All the people who were too worried about what they didn't know to do, and so they wouldn't even look her in the eye. She needed double healing. And so Jesus, who I'm sure is himself caught up in a complicated grief story because he's allowed his own family to die because he was doing the work he needed to do. It's a hard thing to betray the ones you love most for those who sort of love you when they need you. And in this complex way, Jesus comes to those whom he loves, and Lazarus is dead, and Mary is not letting Jesus off the hook. And Martha is saying, "What does it matter? He's just going to smell." And Jesus says, "Lazarus, come out." All of which is very clearly foreshadowing of Jesus' own death, in which he was not able to help himself on the cross, or he would not, in which he was in a tomb with a stone that gets rolled away and he comes out. But what I love about this story is that the miracle's not done there. And the next part of the miracle, again, the community gets drawn into the work that must still happen, and Jesus looks at all of them, all of us, and says, "Unbind him that he may live." For sure, Jesus has done the heavy lifting. Jesus has made death cough up Lazarus, but the stuff of death still clings to him. It's not water under the bridge, and it won't let him go. He's still bound up in it. And Jesus looks at the community and says, "Now it's your turn to create a space in which Lazarus can become unbound by the grief and the death that still holds him." Because all too many of us are the walking wounded, moving in some sort of half-death, not acknowledging the hurts that still cling, the harm that's gone unvoiced. By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept and wept. Except there was COVID, so we couldn't. Except we were busy, so we didn't have time. Except we were too strong to need to weep. And Jesus began to weep. Death clings. Fear clings. Hurt and harm and trauma cling. They are never just water under the bridge. And we are not very good at getting down our knees and roaring like a lion or weeping like a lamb and acknowledging that I need help. Or sitting in a space where we're not sure what help to give. I'd love to end this sermon with the 5-point process in which to unbind grief and live. But even if I had one that worked for me, it might not work for you. Two years ago, I was listening to a podcast from Timothy Oliphant. He's an actor who had a massive stroke right before he got on an airplane. Had he gotten on the airplane, he likely would have died. And he reflects in this podcast that in the initial moment after his stroke, all of his friends, family, community reached out. And then a week later, no one did. And he spent a year learning how to live again, a year learning how to speak again, a year learning how to do things he'd been doing for 40 years. And no one was comfortable enough to join him in that journey. Unbind him and let him live is the charge Jesus gives us. Create space in which you can feel vulnerable enough to share your grief and your fear and your hurt. And you can feel awkward enough to sit there together in it, long past its popularity to do so. Unbind the grief we carry. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.